Welcome back. I'm excited to continue our study of the Ten Commandments together. So we're up to Commandment number 3. Commandment number 3 very simply says, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain." Pretty easy, right? Don't take God's name in vain. But just like our first two commandments, there's a lot more going on than appears on the surface. So we're going to look at this commandment in a little more detail. First, what does this commandment mean by God's name? God has many different names in Hebrew in the Torah. God is called Adonai, God is called Elohim, God is called El, Shaddai, Tzur. Which one of these is the commandment referring to, or does it refer to every Hebrew name for God? Is it referring to speaking of God in English with the name God, God as we usually do? So that's one important element of this commandment, trying to figure out which of God's names or all of God's names are referred to. Another question we can ask about commandment number 3 is, what exactly does it mean to take God's name in vain? What is a good use of God's name, and what is a vain or wasteful use of God's name? What does the commandment intend in commanding us not to use God's name in vain? And lastly, when we look at this third commandment, I always wonder, why is it that this commandment about not using God's name in vain makes it into the top 10 list of the 10 commandments? Especially since we already have those first two commandments that tell us very specifically how we're supposed to believe and behave towards God. Why do we need this third commandment? Surely there are lots of other commandments in Jewish life that might be more important than simply how we use God's name, like giving tzedakah, or feeding the hungry, or taking care of our neighbors. Why specifically this commandment about how we use God's name? Why does that make it into this big list of the 10 commandments? Isn't it crazy how one simple statement like this third commandment can generate so many questions? That we can wonder what it means and what it's supposed to be saying to us, and it doesn't give us specific answers? Well, that's what Torah study really is. That's what it means to be a student of the Torah, to look at each verse very carefully and try to take it apart and get behind the words to the spiritual meaning. So now let's go back to commandment number 3. I honestly think that commandment number 3 has less to do with commanding us about how to use God's name and more to do with the importance of words. That's the essence of this commandment in my view, that it's setting a standard for us that words are very important, words can be dangerous, words can have a big impact, and if we use our words carefully with God, then hopefully that will trickle down to how we use our words in other parts of life. Here's another reason for this third commandment. Because we're not allowed to have images of God or illustrations of God, as we learn in the second commandment, and because God doesn't have the same kind of physical presence that we're used to with human beings, words are a really important tool for how we get to know God, for how we communicate with God, for how we describe our experiences with God. And so how we use those words is really an important element of our spiritual lives. So commandment number 3 presents us with some important spiritual foundations. First, how we think and speak and formulate our questions and our curiosity about God through our words. That's a really important beginning for our spiritual life. And even bigger than that, perhaps, how we use words in our everyday lives, with our family members, with our friends, with our co-workers, even with strangers. That's an important thing to pay attention to in living a spiritual life. Words have tremendous power, as we know. Words can hurt or words can heal. And so this commandment is giving us a starting point all the way at the beginning of these 10 commandments to pay attention, to use our words carefully, to use our words with intention, and to know the consequence of the words that we speak. So thank you for listening, everyone. I look forward to continuing our study of the 10 Commandments with you next time. Bye-bye.